Welcome to the talk show Life Stories with Marc Hoberman. The goal of this show is to provide a learning experience to people of all ages, with guests from various fields in academics, a wide range of industries, and insight into the many forms of art, athletics, and entertainment. We hope you enjoy the show. Body modification artist Lizardman is today's guest. Lizardman will talk about his philosophy on body art as well as his experiences performing globally throughout his career.
Erik Sprague, Lizardman, welcome to Life Stories with Marc Hoberman.
Thank you for having me.
Such a pleasure. We've got so much to go through, but I have to ask you, what can you tell us about your childhood? Because I don't believe you were ever Lizard Boy. So this artistic expression happened later in life, but I want to know a little bit about your childhood.
Right. Well, I often say that I am a freak, but I was not born a freak. I had to go on kind of a long, strange journey to get to where I am today. But my childhood, as it turns out, the only thing that's truly notable about it is just how unremarkable it was. I grew up in a very small, so I'll preface this. My dad was a Vietnam draftee. So I was born on Fort Campbell, Kentucky on base. We were there till I was about 2. Now from 2 to 4, we got moved around a bit. But by the time I started kindergarten, we were in Ellenburg, New York, which is a small, old dairy farming community right on the border of Canada, Clinton County, New York, the northernmost county. And it's where my dad actually grew up. It's where he's from. He had met my mom when they were in college together in Colorado. And so he ended up back there, and he, coming out of the Army, coming out of Vietnam, ended up with a job as a public high school teacher. He taught shop, woodwork, and metalwork. And I grew up, even though as he served in the Guard, he got different posts. He had a very, actually pretty impressive military career. He ended up as a mountain warfare instructor at the East Allen firing range in Jericho, Vermont. And he would teach things like combat ice climbing, skiing. So I got to do all these things growing up. I was 11 years old the first time I rappelled off a helicopter skid, stuff like. But this is the 70s and 80s where the National Guard was kind of like, yeah, bring your family for the weekend. And, as a kid, we got to play around because my dad was at one point the commander in Plattsburgh. But yeah, it's a rural and a country upbringing. I grew up working on farms and things like that. But it was also, like I say, almost painfully normal when I look back at it. And I, at my age now, I'm 52. I look back at that now and I realize, just how special I got. I was living in a bubble. It was a very almost protected sort of thing. I make the reference now when people talk about like TV shows, they go, the old town Mayberry on TV. Right. That was the big town that we went to go grocery shopping. That's how small the town I grew up in. But it gave me a lot of time, and I think this is important for me just personally and artistically to get to know myself. I grew up in a log cabin that my mom and dad built themselves, and our nearest neighbors were about a mile away. And so, we grew up with a sense of community. Like I tell people the stories of, some days in the winter you wake up and you have to dig yourself out from the house to the road. And once you've done that, you get to plow on the truck and you get it out there and you plow your way to your neighbor to see if they've managed to dig themselves out. And so it goes down the line. Those sorts of things were very common growing up. And it's a weird combination of both community and isolation because when we grew up, we heated the entire house by wood. So all summer long, it's go out, chop wood, get it out. And that takes you through the winter. So there's that sort of planning and reliance gets built in to your life. It shaped the way a lot of things that I've approached artistically and the way that I've approached the process of body modification eventually. In fact, I say very often that it's the reason that I've been able to be successful doing this, which I understand. If somebody came to you as a proposal on paper, like, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to tattoo my whole body, split my tongue into. It's crazy, right? It's more ridiculous than saying I'm going to be the quarterback for the Patriots next year. It seems outside the realm of possibility, but when I can break down, how I approach things, how I did it, then it starts to make a lot more sense.
Oh, sure. And everything from many things from our childhood come to us in our careers. And it's funny, many times people say things when I interview them that resonate with me, but sometimes they resonate with me in the opposite way. So combat ice climbing, I'll take things I've never said or done for $100. I mean, right. What really resonates with me, and my friends know this of me, is you mentioned your father being a shop teacher. I don't know how many schools still have wood shop, but in junior high school, I had wood shop. You don't know anyone in your life less handy than I was. You say your parents built a log cabin, all this. I mean, horrible, but I had to build a spice rack. And I don't know what the problem was. The guy said it wasn't good. I guess he didn't like the fact that when you put the spice in, it slid down. I don't think it's supposed to. So
Yeah,
he said to me, listen,
you're supposed to hold it,
yes,
level
exactly.
it. Yeah.
So he said, listen, I can't pass you on this. And I complained. He said, listen, we're going to go to the teacher's lounge. If anyone in the teacher's lounge can guess that this is a spice rack, I'll pass you. So let's just say nobody could guess that was a spice rack. So that's my own story with that. But I love the fact that you are so handy and that you've modified things and then modified yourself. And we'll get into that later. But, we all talk about that. And I know you talk about that as art. And art covers so many areas. I've had award-winning photographers, Chris Cafaro. I've had people who've had their sculptures in the Obama White House. And I've had people with different artistic notions. But as I said, art covers so many areas. But what do you love about art? And how do you live your life now as an artist?
Right. So, I mean, and it's one of the things that I have said very often. People always say to me, like, why are you doing it? Or, what's your motivation? I say, well, look, this is, for me, it's an artistic expression of elements of myself that I want to, well, obviously express, but also to explore. It creates a conversation with other people and takes it out of just being inside my head. And so I started off with a lot of influences. One of the earliest ones, where my oldest influence would be someone like Joseph Beuys, who was an early Dadaist, who also sort of dabbled in performance art. And I was entering college in 1990 with these dreams of basically being a 70s performance artist. So, I think a very freshman artist sort of attitude, like, oh yeah, this is what I would do. And so for those people were like Vito Acconci, Chris Burden, Carolee Schneeman. They're names that a lot of people don't necessarily leap to mind, but if I tell you the projects that they did, you start to go, oh yeah, I heard about that. So the guy who got shot intentionally, the guy who got crucified on a Volkswagen Bug, then people go, oh yeah, I remember hearing about that in that art class I took. Well, yeah, these sort of weirdo body-based performance, or people like Orlan, who's still active today and does a lot with plastic surgery, were sort of influences to me and got me thinking about stuff that I had been approaching before as sort of a costume or even just pure concept, sort of like trying to express through body language and mimicry, sort of like a mind performance, they say, like, act like an octopus. Okay, what do I do? And you start moving, but it was all basically a way to explore how humanity is defined for me, is how I looked at it. Because there's this, and I just did a talk in New York. It was great with actually had an ecologist on who's telling you about chimeras, where when we try to drill down hard into biological definitions, they often start falling apart because we don't get what we want. The classic example is, Plato says man is a featherless biped, and Diogenes chucks a plucked chicken over the wall and goes, "There's your man," right? And it's it to me, it goes back to, I'm a big fan of ancient Greek philosophy. It goes back to Socrates' notion when he was asked what defined man. He didn't go to biology. He said it's the realm of ideas. Man is the only creature that engages and it participates in the realm of ideas, creating ideas and concepts. So that's what I think is what we're talking about, humanity. We're often talking about actually a philosophy of mind, right? You don't have my DNA to prove that I'm human. I don't have your DNA to prove that you're human. We could be talking to simulacra or Turing test machine dummies, any number of things like that. But what we do is we have this assumption, okay, if they act a certain way, they speak a certain way, they communicate a certain way, well, that's a human, or it's a human mind. It's a consciousness that I can interact with. And so it became fun for me as a young artist to play around with non-human ideas and concepts. Like, how far can I go before people start going, are you a human? Are you a person? What are you thinking? And are they then willing to expand their definition? Or do they say, no, you're out, you don't get to be in this category anymore? And I mean, it's a very playful, philosophical sort of thing. And that, combined with just good lucky timing on my part, mid-90s, the world decides that sideshow and circus are cool again. And I kind of ride the wave as some of the early Renaissance performers. Yeah, it was really a big part of my personal success. Comes down to just luck. Right place, right time.
Right. Well,
I think that's true of a lot of people.
Oh, absolutely. You can have all the talent in the world. If you don't have that luck also, no matter how much, you're not going to get where you
need to get lucky at least a little bit once.
Absolutely. I want to tell you something that resonates with me, because what you're really talking about, some of the things you mentioned, is part of education. And as you know, I was an educator, but for over 30 years. And you mentioned Socrates. So I led a lot of Socratic seminars. When you talk about the exchange of concept and ideas, that's what Socratic seminar is all about, of course, taken from Socrates. So I want to talk about education for a minute, because my wife and I are SUNY Albany graduates. I know that might resonate with you a little bit because I believe
Yeah.
you might have studied there as well. So what did college do for you and what was college like for you?
Right. Well, I got my undergraduate degree from Hartwick College in Oneonta,
Right.
and then I was off for about a year and a half. And in the fall of 1996, I began my doctoral studies at SUNY Albany in the philosophy department. I was an active doctoral student there from the fall of 96 till the spring of 99. And then I'm actually technically still on leave. I took an indefinite leave of absence. But graduate school, what it drove home for me, and I realized this very early on the first semester when I went back to school, is I love academic environments. I love school campuses. I love the community and the discussion that's available and all that. But I hate the actual job. Like, go teach a class, sure, every day, all day. I'll teach. But the departmental aspects of it, the sort of the office stuff like that, just absolutely sort of just killed part of me, and I wasn't enjoying it. And I sort of, I looked, to see down the path. And it's one of those things where, now one of the pieces of advice that I give to young performers in circus and theater, but I think it can be applied to anybody, is if you're thinking about doing something with your life, go look at the old people who do it. Go look at someone who's already done it for their entire life and ask yourself if you want to end up like them. Because if you go down the same path, you usually end up at the same destination. And I sort of looked at the life of a professor. I'm like, okay, maybe I end up at a community college, maybe I get into a decent university, but I'm just planning this out. I'm like, all I would have been doing was looking forward to retirement, right? Just chasing retirement, as opposed to, and again, being lucky, right time, right place. I get this, okay, there's a thin chance, but now's the time to take the shot. If you want to go out and play circus freak and rock star every day for the rest of your life, there's a chance, but you got to pull the trigger and you got to go hard and now.
Right. So it was I wouldn't call it a short journey. I mean, it got you at a certain place, but there was a lot leading up to it. But when were you first introduced to tattooing, and what was the genesis that started the phenomenon that is Lizardman?
Right. So when I got to Hartwick College in 1990 as a freshman, I had this thing that I used to do. I mean, just haven't done it lately because it's not convenient, but because I'm not in libraries a lot anymore. But back then I was always in the library as a big nerd. And one of my favorite things to do was just to wander around the library. And if I saw a book that looked interesting, literally judging a book by its cover, grab it, give it a random flip, take a look, and you'll see what I found. And sometimes I discover something, and other times I just put it right back, whatever. So I was doing this around the art section of the library, and I pulled out a book on Japanese tattooing. And I knew about tattooing before. And I even knew about Japanese tattooing because I was a big fan of ninja movies in the 80s, like a lot of kids, right? But I'd never really put it together as art. And I also had experience because my dad's military career with military tattooing, stuff like that. I think that's where my brain usually went with tattooing at that point. But in this book, The Japanese Tattoo, I saw full body suits,
right,
thematic and done by masters. And it's one of those, instant moment. I had one of those art moments. Art did to me what it's supposed to do. It instantly changed my mind and opened up a whole new world looking at these. I was like, oh God, the possibilities started rushing into my mind, was churning like an 18-year-old mind does. And, and like I said, before this, I had ideas about doing stuff with costumes. And I was very big into the idea of hoaxes like Sasquatch, like Bigfoot. Like at that point, like, that would have been the greatest achievement of my life when I was 18, if I could have pulled off something on the level of like Loch Ness or Bigfoot, so I was in those directions. And so looking at these tattoos and sort of realizing what was possible, I started looking more and researching more, and it's stewing around in my head. And I learned about the tradition of tattooed men in circuses and exhibiting themselves and the history of them. And it's all sort of, resonating with me really strongly. And I mean, these ideas, I'm starting to pull different threads together from philosophy and from art that have interested me. And it all kind of comes together in this idea of doing a project where I transform my body to become something that is somewhat other than or an expansion of what is human. That was the original sort of conceit of it. And it's very sophomore art. And it's fun for me. I smile at it still when I look back at it now as a 52-year-old. But it got me going, and it got me going down that path. And it also provided me, they say, as I watched circus and sideshow become popular again in sort of mainstream culture and art, I started to see an avenue. So I started performing and doing things. So my earliest sideshow performances were actually done as performance art, where I would do sideshow acts, but I would call it performance art. Like one time I had the word truth engraved on the side of a nail that I hammered into my face, which is the human blockhead act. So I thought what I was going to do, I thought I was going to be the guy who took all these old sideshow acts that people had forgotten and turned them into modern day performance art. But what happened was a modern audience showed up and said, no, just give us a sideshow act. We love it. So I started going down that route. And that's where, in terms of like presentation style and performance, it ended up going.
Right. And so, yeah, but it's not just tattooing. Now we go to body modification. So if you wouldn't mind, so I see people who are viewing this may think that the things that look like bumps on your head is just some kind of 3D image, but they don't just look like bumps on your head. They are bumps in your head. Because you could explain that to the viewers.
Yeah. So once I got into tattooing, and I because as we've established, I think in a number of ways, I was and am a nerd. So I have an interest in tattooing. What do? Head to the library, look up tattooing, right? Even this here's a great reference too. The first time that I looked up tattooing in my college library, I looked it up in a card catalog. So those days, and I found, and there's very little, especially like academic data on tattooing. It's not like it's been well studied. There are a couple of books that were kind of considered, okay, somebody did it and we'll leave it at that, not realizing just how shallow those books were. So I ended up going through histories. Stoney Knows How is a good oral history. This book, I forget his first name, Sanders, but he wrote a sociology book, like a sociology text for it. It was more of an academic study. And that influenced me a lot because a lot of his stuff there was him going into tattoo parlors of his day and sort of observing, okay, what's the accepted behavior? Which is, something that I read very carefully, thinking I'm like, okay, I got to go walk into a tattoo studio and I got to convince somebody that it's a good idea to tattoo my tattoo. Because I wasn't going in, for a piece at a time. My idea was, from the beginning, it was top to bottom. We're going to do this whole thing. Wow. And so but eventually I broke it down into a piece. So it was part of my back piece where I was like, okay, I'll get that done, because, you can say what you want before you've actually been tattooed. You have no idea whether or not you're capable of getting your whole body tattooed. It is a physical ordeal. And, but I did it and I figured, okay, yeah, I can go through with it. Once you start doing that, you're going to very quickly find the corollary aspects. You get into tattooing, you're going to find piercing, right? And I'd already pierced my ears before I'd gotten tattooed, just the standard couple of hoops in my ears, because, I was 17 and I thought they looked cool. I liked them. And I was very much a punk rock kid too. You give me a baby pin, boom, it's going through my ear. That was me when I was 17 or 18. So I kind of got in and I learned a little bit more about piercing. And again, go to the library, I'm getting the books, I'm studying, cultural practices, tribal practices, and just sort of finding little influences here and there and saying like, oh yeah, I like that idea and I like the way it looks. Okay. Because at the same time that I'm doing this, I didn't start off with Lizardman specifically. I started off with this sort of general idea that was just kind of alien or other than human. But as things started to come together, the ones that appealed to me all kind of had this reptilian aspect to it. So it made sense. But I kept a list of a number of options. I considered X's, skulls, polka dots, skeletal system, considered writing a story and having the words tattooed over my entire body so you'd have to read me, full body maze, just, all these sorts of different things. But like I said, as I'm getting into this and I'm finding I'm actually at this point, we're talking early to mid 90s, getting online, I discovered bulletin board groups and I started participating in some of them. I started learning about some of the more experimental things that are out there, like subdermal Teflon implants. At the time that these were done, they were the largest that Steve Hayworth, the inventor of the procedure, had ever done. Now they're tiny. You see people with much larger implants than mine walking around Manhattan on any given day. But, back in the day, this was as big as he had ever been willing to go, because he's still figuring it out as we went along. In fact, my tongue bifurcation I was the guinea pig for a surgery that I designed. I convinced an oral surgeon. I was like, hey, do you think this would work? And he goes, yeah, I don't see any technical reason why it wouldn't. I said, good, why don't you do it on me? Wow. And he was game.
And then that's where the story kind of really started, because the holistic Lizardman happened. But I have to ask you, because you said you worked in schools, and I'm all about education, and there are people who don't have confidence. There are people who are bullied all the time. So from the horse's mouth, you're in an elevator alone. Yep. It opens and a woman and her 5-year-old son get on the elevator. What happens next?
Well, a lot depends on how the woman reacts, because children react according to the adults around them. A child's reaction is, either so completely honest that they break with the adult's expectations. This is when, like sort of like the first time you learn that your kid knows some profanity.
Right.
If they're that shocked. But in my experience, most of the time, a child, especially a 5-year-old, is going to do what the mom does. So if they sense them tensing up at all, they might stop, they might freeze. I've had all of these reactions. I've had, the kid blurt out the F word, just involuntarily. I've had the kid freeze up. Oh my God, what is that? I've also had the kid be like, wow. In fact, that actually just happened. I was at a couple of friends' house for the 4th of July. And as I walked into the backyard, there were a couple of people there who brought their kids who I hadn't met yet, didn't know, just friends of friends. And one of their kids is in the pool. And I'm just sort of looking at it. I'm setting something down. And as I stand up, he looks right at me and just goes, wow. That's sort of weird. Like, yeah, hi, how you doing? It's, like I say, it comes out of that. Now, the wood walking it, I mean, here's the thing. I would say, and I braced myself before I ever did this. I looked at the experiences of historically tattooed men, specifically sideshow and freak show attractions. One of my more modern day inspirations was Mike Wilson at Coney Island, and he kind of talked about how when he first got his face tattooed, how things changed. And he's talking about his experiences in New York City.
Right.
He's not talking about a little rural town like where I grew up and nobody's ever seen this shit before. He's talking about New York, supposedly the hippest place in the world.
Right.
And people are putting change on the counter and sliding it at him instead of touching his tattooed hands. Things like that. Ooh. So I did the old plan for the worst, hope for the best, right? And like, okay, is this worth it to me? What am I, how am I going to react to that? Let's say that I get totally shut. And that's sort of what I prepared myself for. I would say that the overwhelming, if I'm going to put like a made up statistic on it, I'm going to say 90% of my interactions with strangers are overwhelmingly positive.
Oh, wonderful.
I've got some theories on why that is beyond just general human altruism and niceness. I mean, I think a lot of it has to do with media appearances. I did note that there are certain TV appearances that changed or shifted the demographics of responses to me, for sure. And it's one of the things I think that, and I know other people, right, that haven't had the media coverage because they don't want it, but are similarly heavily modified. And I see the reactions that they get. And I go, okay, the big difference between us is that I once got the seal of approval from a talk show host on a magic talkie box. So now you think I'm all right.
Exactly.
And I think that's unfortunate, but I think it's also very much a reality.
Right. I would agree with that. I have to ask you, in closing, we always ask our guests about the story behind the glory, because this was not easy to do. There was physical problems, there's emotional challenges, there's the way other people look at you. So what struggles did you have to overcome to get where you are today?
Right. I think that sort of the initial one is one that you touched upon before, which is confidence. And, and that leads back to how we opened up the show, which is childhood. I was raised with an insane amount of probably undue confidence. Like I would just go out and say I was stupidly arrogant, like a lot of us are as teenagers, whatever. But, it was definitely in part some of that gave me the confidence to go ahead and take risks. But it was also combined, like I said, with the way that I was brought up and the education that my parents gave me, that I took risks. I always used to like to say that I do the dumbest possible things in the smartest possible way. Ooh. Right? You give me a bad idea, I run with it. I run with it for the hills. But before I start running, I sit down and I plan it out. I can remember as a kid learning about Evel Knievel and all the math that was involved. Right? Again, I was a nerd. I was so excited because I loved Evel Knievel. Wait, Evel Knievel is math. Yeah, that's what those jumps come down to. That's math. I mean, yeah, but it's not all math. That's where like when I got older and I started to realize that was where a different sort of confidence comes in, because being self-taught in a lot of sideshow arts that had otherwise all but died out means there was a moment for a lot of these stunts where I had to pull the trigger and say, how much do you believe your research? How smart do you think you are? Like I'm sitting there with a sword that I'm going to try and shove down my throat, and I'm going, okay, have I really figured this out? Am I absolutely sure it's not a trick, but I understand the action now? Right? There are those sorts of moments to overcome. And then I think that, another one is, and these are each sort of stages that I think you go through, and it should be analogous to other people's lives as well, is that you get to that point where you've made it and you've had some success, but then you've got to sort of how do I put this? I guess it's the reconciling the difference between what you thought it was going to be and what the maturity of learning to accept it for what it is. Because, especially with something like circus, I hear people all the time say, after shows, they get kids are like, oh, I want to do sideshow. I want to go to the circus. I want to do that. And even whether it's like sideshow stuff like I do, or even like Cirque du Soleil or whatever. Mm-hmm. And it's one of those things. I understand now, right? When I was a kid, that's why the old person laughed, right? Because they know it's nothing like that. Oh, you poor child, right? And now I have that sort of perspective of like that one. For me, I think it took me a while, and I think, and I've watched other people struggle too, is that you have to sort of go like, okay, I'm living my alleged dream now. I am a traveling sideshow performer, and that is what I do for a living. But there's a lot of stuff that I didn't know about, a lot of realities that are now taking part of this, and I've got to accept them. It's my way of putting it now, like I say, when I'm working with younger people, especially on shows, is you've got to love the worst parts of it. Do you like driving 500 miles to a gig and then 500 miles home? Learn to love that drive. Learn to enjoy sitting in that car. Just keep telling yourself it's money or it's success or whatever it is that drives you, but learn to love the horrible parts. Yeah, I hate cleaning my props after a show, right? They're filthy. I'm filthy, but don't let them sit overnight. That's just smart. Take care of your gear so they'll take care of you. Learn to love that part of it. And that's, I feel like some people don't think that's a challenge, but I think it's one of the biggest challenges there is, because it shows up every day. Every day, you've got to, again, be disciplined enough to do the things you're supposed to do.
Really phenomenal advice, not just for careers, but for life. So Lizardman, I can't thank you enough for being such a special guest and for sharing your impactful journey with us.
Thank you so much.
Oh, for sure. And for the people watching, I hope Lizardman's journey has shown you that anything is possible. I mean, look, anything. And remember, you have the power to make positive changes in your own lives. So we love to hear from our viewers. So stay connected with us on social media. Find us on social media on Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn. Don't forget to like and follow us for the latest episode, updates, and exciting new content. Lizardman, thank you so much for your openness and transparency and your authenticity today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark.
Thank you for watching Life Stories with Marc Hoberman. To contact Marc, email him at info@lifestorieswithmarchoberman.com or visit him on social media through Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok, and LinkedIn. Thank you for watching Life Stories with Marc Hoberman.